What's shaking, everyone? Today we're going to be discussing my favorite football team ever. The 2012 Ravens were a complete unit, and in my opinion, the best Baltimore Ravens championship team. There is only one other comparison. Even though 2001 had a much more complete defense, the overall package in 2012 was far superior, at least in my opinion. And we're going to be running down the regular season, all the high points that were there, and then going through the playoffs, which were up and down. Just, it was a magical time to be a Ravens fan, and I will show you why it is my absolute favorite football team and the definition of underrated champions. Why I have no idea, nobody discusses this team more, but I'm going to right that wrong here today, and I hope you guys stick around for it, because I appreciate every single one of you who likes to challenge the mainstream opinions out there. And part of that reason why I think you stop by my channel is because I don't offer the regular standard fare from the ABCs, the NBCs, and the NBCs out there. I'm here to find the truth and make it entertaining for everybody out there. So I thank you all for giving my channel a try, and if there's a sports team that you would like for me to dive deeper into in the future here that won a championship and is not getting the press that you believe that they should, feel free to drop it in that comment section down below. Or if you'd like to further discuss the 2012 Ravens, I sure as hell would love to have that conversation. And while you're down there, if you don't mind just hitting that subscribe button or just dropping a like on the video if you appreciate the content that we're doing here, that would do a great service to this burgeoning channel, which I thank each and every one of you for stopping by and giving me a shot here. So first things first, I want to give you a recap of why I think that this team was just so damn complete. So I got the roster page pulled up here. Now, first and foremost, Joe Flacco. He had a tremendous postseason, but his regular season was adequate. He always threw for around 60% completion, somewhere around 3,500 yards, 20 touchdowns. He was never great. The dude could throw the ball out of the stadium. He was moderately accurate, but he always just made stupid fucking decisions. He would always initially look deep, always trying to hit the speedsters that they had on this team, which they had a few. But he'd always just end up checking down. And if he didn't have the likes of Dennis Pitta, Ed Dixon as tight ends, just a tremendous pair of tight ends. Dennis Pitta is definitely headed for the Hall of Fame, and Ed Dixon's no slouch either. Or if those guys were too busy blocking on an I formation, Ray Rice, when everybody hears the name Ray Rice, they immediately think the elevator, but that dude could not only knock a bitch out, but he could definitely bust off a run. The fucking guy was cut exactly from the cloth of Marshall Faulk, LaDainian Tomlinson. The only reason he isn't talked about in those same circles is because he didn't do it for the same amount of time. You know, he was really one of the first people who got successfully canceled, because after the Vegas brawl he had with his girlfriend, he never got another shot at the NFL, which Michael Vick can go around killing dogs and have another second half of his career, and fucking Dante Stallworth can run a family over and kill somebody, and fucking he'll be a Super Bowl champion with the Patriots, but you try to recreate a Dave Chappelle skit and your career's over. What did Five Fingers say to the face? You're out of the league. And before we move on to the defense, I want to give a shout out to Vonta Leach, probably the last great fullback until the I formation comes back. Now, we all know sports is kind of cyclical with how things come and go, and we're definitely in the past first era. But it's kind of funny too, because I think that the Ravens or even the Chiefs could probably do with reinstituting a fullback to pass block more on the run option plays that those guys run, because now every quarterback's athletic and has the booming arm, but if they wanted to run more sweeps or more quarterback runs first and foremost, if they could get an athletic big fullback like Vonta Leach was, or Lorenzo Neal, somebody who was maybe a little bit faster than those guys, I could definitely see the fullback coming into the vogue once again. But that's a big if, and maybe not likely, but it's definitely a thought. But the only reason Joe Flacco was allowed to make such I don't know, juvenile high school level decisions on a weekly basis for this championship level team was because he had a terrific offensive line. Matt Burke, the smartest offensive lineman ever. The fucking guy graduated from Harvard, for Christ's sakes. Michael Orr, who was probably the subject of a better movie than he was a football player. Not to take anything away from him. He was a very good tackle, but once he eventually moved to guard, I think for Tennessee, he was a little bit better off there. And Marshall Yanda is a 100% Hall of Famer. The guy is lights out and was never overmatched by anybody. And on defense, man, we have to go by divisions because there was so much fucking talent on this side of the ball. Terrence Cody, the man who, you guys remember Tony Siragusa from the 2001 team. Well, they just got the bigger and blacker version of him. Fucking guy was nearly 4 bills, and was strong as all fuck. And then you had the third Jones brother. Yeah, I can say that because Chandler Jones is a Pro Bowl defensive end, and John Jones is the most talented mixed martial artist in history. Just the fucking guy needs to keep his nose clean. Pernell McPhee doesn't get talked about often, but he was definitely a good stand-in on first and second downs. He was definitely a talented run blocker. And then 92 Haloti Ngata, who should end up in the Hall of Fame because that guy at nearly 3.5 bills could turn a corner and make tackles look like absolute children for the entire time he was in Baltimore. He couldn't replicate that success when he went over to Detroit, but man, Haloti Ngata, he should be talked about in the same breath as Ray Lewis and Ed Reed, because when it comes to all-time Baltimore Ravens defensive players, he is definitely top 10, if not top 5. And their linebacker core got decimated throughout the entire season, but it was a dearth. It was definitely the deepest part of their entire team. Like, you had Brendan Ian-Bahedo. I can never pronounce his name correctly. The guy is super talented and definitely got to stand out once Ray Lewis retired after the year. Donnell Ellerbe was a perfect complement to Ray Lewis after Bart Scott left town for the Jets, and if that was one of the Bart Scott's dumbest decisions, he really should have just stuck around Baltimore, because he could have definitely slid into Ray Lewis's position and had a much longer career had he not taken the money and run with Rex Ryan off to the Jets there in no man's land. Sorry, Jets fans. Your team's cursed. Deal with it. Then, of course, you had T-Sizzle on the outside, which, I don't know, man. Outside linebackers, for me personally, top 5 all time. He could do everything. Courtney Upshaw's a total beast. And this was his rookie season, and he really came into his own after 2012. Then you just peer over at the reserve list. You see guys who were hurt at the end of the year. Jameel McLean, which was a reclamation project, I do believe, from Syracuse, who went undrafted, and he got refined in that Baltimore system and turned out to have a really decent career that's still going on when he took his talents off to the Giants there. Unfortunately, it didn't work out, but yeah, man, he definitely played above his abilities based on that, tremendous quarterback or linebacker factory that the Ravens actually truly are. And then, of course, you can't move past linebackers without mentioning my favorite player of all time, Ray Lewis. Greatest linebacker ever. Fuck you, fight me. Interceptions, sacks, leadership. He did everything for that team. He set the model for what a leader needs to be on every single team. Vocal, relatable, and approachable. Even today, you can fire up a Ray Lewis speech and get fucking psyched out of your tree. And he is definitely a deserved first ballot Hall of Famer. Nobody will be as good as Ray Lewis was for the Ravens over 16 years. As good as the linebacking core was, I think the defensive backs were just as good, if not a little bit better. Like, you had Ladarius Webb there, who signed, in the offseason, he signed a huge contract in order to stay with the Ravens because he knew where his bread was buttered and where he'd be in the best formation. And the guy just doesn't get talked about. He was as good as Darrelle Revis, Champ Bailey, and all those other lockdown corners in the early 2000s. Just a tremendous zone guy, an absolute ball hawk. He just worked extremely well in that Baltimore system. And second year for Jimmy Smith, who is a speedster And if he would have went to any other team, because one of the big knocks on him coming out of the draft in 2011 was he had an attitude problem. He was a little bit unfocused. If he would have went to a different defensive unit outside of maybe Pittsburgh, shit would have got real sideways real quick for Jimmy. But he's turned into a Pro Bowl level cornerback and a pillar for current day Baltimore defense. And of course, the pairing of Bernard Pollard and Ed Reed, who is the greatest free safety and probably the greatest safety since Ronnie Lott. There's a reason Tom Brady continuously game planned around the Baltimore defense based on one individual, and that was Ed Reed, because you remember that black shade that he had, and quarterbacks were terrified because he would jump through the air, take angles to the ball you did not see coming, and he would pick that motherfucker out of the air like nobody's business. The only knock I give Ed Reed is he really should have retired with Ray Lewis at the end of this year and not went to Houston, not went to the Jets. He should have just called it a career, because there was nothing sadder than seeing him put on a different jersey, and it was just not the same. He tried his damnedest, and Houston had a great defense in 2013. It's just he didn't fit in there, and that jersey just never looked proper. And before we're done gushing over the roster page, Sam Cooke can punt a ball as well as Ray Rice fantasizes about kicking a bitch, and Justin Tucker was a rookie this year. Last year, or the prior year, 2011, Billy Cundiff, who was a really good kicker, inexplicably missed a chip shot field goal that could have sent the 2011 Baltimore Ravens to the AFC Championship game wide right. So I know how Baltimore Ravens fans can relate to the Buffalo Bills teams of the early 90s, because for fuck's sakes, wide right chip shot field goal. And maybe that was a blessing in disguise, because Justin Tucker is the greatest modern day kicker. The dude has legs for miles, and he's deadly accurate. There's a lot to love about this team, and I think I explained it fairly well, because even if they weren't massive stars, they fit extremely well in the system. And Baltimore, well, since the Ravens' inception, have been a defense-first team. And I can't believe I missed the wide receiver core on the offensive side of the ball. The only thing that was actually missing for this entire team to be one of the greatest teams ever was a, well, competent quarterback. I just don't like Joe Flacco. Sorry, tough titties. Anquan Boldin should be a Hall of Famer. Size of a tight end, speed of a kick returner, and could run routes as well as anybody since Randy Moss. Torrey Smith was on top of his game, and Jacoby Jones was one of the fastest human beings alive at this point. But enough gushing about the roster. What was the talk coming into this season? Coming into the 2012 season, Joe Flacco gave an interview, or he had an interview at a preseason rally where he was asked, does he think that he's one of the top 5 best quarterbacks? Of course you say yes. When you're the leader of a team who is expected to at least make the playoffs and maybe make a run at the Super Bowl, you have to have confidence in your abilities. And he, for whatever reason, instead of giving the political answer, he actually sacked up and said, no, I think I'm the best quarterback in football. Even Baltimore fans were like, Jesus fucking Christ, dial it back a little bit, stupid. You're not even the best quarterback on your team. You still had Tupac Taylor there, who was, he's carved out a decent career for himself. And this was also the team that almost wasn't, because T-Sizzle loves to play pickup games of basketball, and he was out for the first 9 weeks of the season because he tore his Achilles tendon playing a pickup game of basketball. Maybe, possibly, that's kind of the general consensus. Nobody ever got a straight answer out of him, but yeah, that's when guys like Donnell Ellerbe and Courtney Upshaw and Jameel McLean really needed to step up in his absence, because he might have missed the entire season, but he did come back 9 weeks into it, and they probably wouldn't have won the Super Bowl without it. Because as much as I gushed about Ed Reed, he's not a leader, but T-Sizzle is as close as you could get to Ray Lewis when it comes to being a unifying force on this football team. So enough preamble, let's get into the season. We're not going to go week to week, we're just going to hit all the high points, because this video would be 9 hours long if I just went through every single game, because I'm pretty sure I watched, I think I only missed maybe a handful of these games, but I was glued, because I was convinced at the beginning of this season that T-Sizzle was coming back, and this was going to be a really good team that could definitely challenge for the Super Bowl. Was I convinced they were going to win? I don't know. I wouldn't go that far, but I thought that they were going to be there at the end because they were so close in 2011. They were so close in 2010. It's just everything was leading to this season. So the first game that we're going to stop on is a rematch of that 2011 divisional round game where the Patriots came into town, and just the night before, Torrey Smith's brother died in a motorcycle crash. Nobody would have thought anything less of Torrey if he would have taken the game off because he was so shaken up. And the team was feeling it because the Patriots came out and scored 20 unanswered points. But of course, Flacco had his security blanket and Dennis Pitta, who caught one of the touchdowns to help even up the score. And then whenever one individual player seems to be playing through hardship, they always seem to come through in the end. And yeah, Torrey Smith was responsible for the game-winning touchdown. Just a great game and a great story. And then week 6, when the Dallas Cowboys came into town, shit went fucking sideways. Ray Lewis tore his tricep, and for all intents and purposes, that was going to end his season, and he was 37 years old at the time. He could still go, without a doubt. He was still one of the best linebackers in all of football, but very few people have ever come back from a torn tricep injury, especially at his age. So everybody kind of thought that, oh fuck, Ray Lewis's career's over, and this is how it's going to end, with a 5-1 season, and shit's just going to go downhill. And if that wasn't bad enough, Ladarius Webb, without a doubt their number one cornerback at the time, tore his ACL. This was a horrific game that they just squeaked by to win anyways. And then we just go to the following week without Ray Lewis on the sidelines when he was off getting tricep surgery. Fucking Matt Schwab, if you remember that name, points to you, absolutely beat the piss out of the Ravens, 43-13. That was a team on defense that looked like a bunch of lost children, and J.J. Watt was having a fucking time of just rushing Joe Flacco, who, whenever he was pressured, he would just make the dumbest decisions, the quickest decisions. He was never the most nimble human being, but man, he made Peyton Manning look acrobatic at times. But thank the good baby Jesus that week 8 was a bye week, so they could regroup and try to figure out what the fuck they were going to do moving forward. And Ray Lewis came back after his tricep surgery, and they had a closed door meeting and tried to figure some shit out, and it worked. And thankfully they got to go into Cleveland and take out any frustrations that they had there. And also Terrell Suggs came back in week 9, beating out a lot of doctors' prognosis at the time, and was exactly what the team needed. They finally had that unifying force on the team that, if you've never played sports before, it really just sounds like a cliche, but if you aren't cohesive, if you don't have chemistry with your teammates, or even at work, if you can relate to this, if you don't have chemistry with your coworkers, the job seems longer. Everything seems more difficult. If you guys can't work together, if you guys can't find common ground, shit's going to be 1,000 times harder. And you could see that instantly with Terrell Suggs coming back into the lineup, because week 10, they unfortunately for, half of me, but they beat the tar out of the Raiders. And that was all sides of the ball, because Jacoby Jones was having a day with a 105-yard touchdown kickoff return. This was pre-Derek Carr Oakland Raiders, so they were still trying to figure out what they could do with Carson Palmer, or, hey, we just drafted Terrell Pryor, and we'd like to try him at quarterback, but we aren't going to give him a fair shake at that. That was lost Raiders years, without a doubt. Week 12 gets overlooked as a potential, if they didn't win this game, if Ray Rice didn't run for 29 yards for a first down on a 4th and 29, their season would have been over. Joe Flacco was having just a typical Joe Flacco, not throwing for touchdowns, not doing anything productive type game, and the pieces around him were carrying the team. And as you can see, the defense was definitely holding their own. And in spite of the best quarterback in football, they managed to get it to overtime. And that lucky rookie, I think he has a future, Justin Tucker, kicked a tremendous field goal in order to win. Everybody agrees, best kicker ever. And then week 15, they get beat the fuck by Peyton Manning's new squad. This was the first year he was in Denver after all of that was really the big offseason hoopla when Miami was flying down to Tennessee to see if he'd come play for them, or was he going to go to the Titans, or do we even know if he can play? Or is the stem cell, is the Regenetine treatment really going to work on Peyton's neck? And he was having an absolute career year in Denver because that was a great team that had the defense that his 2006 championship team wished that they had. Like, you had Von Miller, you had Elvis Dumervil. The list goes on and on. They had a bunch of tremendous players on that team, and that was definitely the consensus pick to win the Super Bowl. But we'll get back to them in a minute. They beat the living fuck out of the Ravens at home at M&T Bank. And this was off of the heels of Jim Caldwell. Y'all remember Jim Caldwell? He was the head coach that took over for Tony Dungy for the Indianapolis Colts the last year that Peyton Manning was healthy, and was exposed as being a fraud and maybe not that good of a head coach when Curtis Painter had to take over for the season that Manning missed, and the dude was much better suited to being an assistant coach. And eventually his offensive schemes worked in because they started to run more trick plays, a lot more trickery to hide for to overcompensate for the lack of skill that a certain quarterback for the Baltimore Ravens, who I won't continue to shit on, has. And Cam Cameron, who is a very smart football mind, just didn't know what he had. He could see all the talent around the quarterback, but couldn't properly harness Joe Flacco. Cost him his job, and Jim Caldwell, well, as Jim Harbaugh put it, thought would spark a change in the Ravens. And after getting their shit pushed in at the behest of Peyton Manning, they really needed to turn it around quick, because they were 9-5 and the playoffs were not exactly secured. Because if you remember at the time, Andy Dalton was in his second year, AJ Green was there. That was a very good Bengals team because Ben Jarvis Green Ellis was still a competent running back, and their defense was nothing to sniff at. I forget who the asshole with the big long mane was, the linebacker in Cincinnati, but that was a very good defensive unit. And of course, Ben Roethlisberger is still in his prime, running those great offenses and great defenses for the Steelers. So the AFC North was, and still is, a very competitive division that the Cleveland Browns get to tag along to every once in a while. But luckily enough, with a little bit of help and a bunch of well-timed victories, especially against the previous year, the 2011 Super Bowl champions, the New York Giants, they beat them at home and clinched the AFC North with a little bit of help from the collapse of the injured Steelers and holding the tiebreaker over the Bengals. They were going to win the North and be locked into fourth spot, where they'd have to go in and face the Indianapolis Colts led by Andrew Luck, who, it's really unfortunate he had to retire, or he chose to retire so young, because that guy, man, he is so tremendously talented, but man, your health really does come before anything else. So no shade on his decision there. But after the regular season for the Ravens wrapped up, Ray Lewis made the announcement that, hey, guess what? I'm healed up enough and I can come back. He had the big old the contraption on his left arm to keep everything in place. And the popular theory around the time is he was using elk antler spray or deer antler spray. I couldn't find anything when I was doing research for the video, but that was helping him heal. As much as I love Ray Lewis, he's a bit of a fucking head case off the field. And that's partially why I love him too. He was trying anything to get back to make this team work, because that wasn't the only thing announcing coming back that he was going to make it in for the playoffs. He was going to retire at the end of the season, and he figured that was the final push, the final spark that the team would need to make it and win the Super Bowl. And when I heard that press conference, I was shocked and saddened and definitely convinced that they were making it to the Super Bowl, regardless of how tough that this trek was going to be, because I thought certainly they were going to beat the daylights out of the Colts. There was no thought in my mind. The offense was finally clicking under Jim Caldwell. And it was going to be sweet victory because Chuck Pagano, head coach for the Colts, was the offensive coordinator the year before in 2011, which led to him getting the head coaching job for the Indianapolis Colts, which is, of course, poetic because if you know your NFL history, the Baltimore Ravens were preceded by the Baltimore Colts. And so these teams, like it or not, are going to be inexorably linked throughout the entire time of both franchises. Well, we don't need to mention the Cleveland Browns because they eventually got their own football team. So it just sucks to be them because this could have been the Indianapolis Colts at Cleveland Browns because, sucks to be Cleveland. But yeah, outside of the fact that this was Ray Lewis's last home game, there wasn't really much information to parse out of this. Andrew Luck never threw a touchdown, and they made them look like absolute children because you get your general back in Ray Lewis, and they were not losing his final home game regardless if that game would still be going on today. They were not going to be losing that. And then you have, in my opinion, probably the most difficult time and most difficult game that this team had throughout the entire season. Going into Mile High Stadium in the frigid cold with the wind just blowing out of the stadium, and having to take on the guy who should have been the MVP, but the comeback of the year, Peyton Manning. And this was the playoffs that Joe Flacco can walk into any restaurant in Baltimore once they are eventually opened, I suppose, and dine for free for the rest of his life because I got his stats page pulled up here. And my God, the 2012 playoffs for him were magical. 1,100 yards, 11 touchdowns, 0 interceptions throughout the entire playoffs. It'll go down as one of the best single player performances in a span of a playoffs, and it is definitely the only great thing that he ever contributed to the Baltimore Ravens legacy. And he managed to hang with Peyton Manning and definitely not look like a child, and even perhaps best him and live up to that preseason proclamation that he's the best quarterback in professional football. Because everybody remembers the final play of the game, the one where Jacoby Jones broke off a 70-yard touchdown with 41 seconds left in the fourth quarter in order to send it to the eventual second overtime where Justin Tucker kicked the game winner. But Trendon Holiday for the Denver Broncos was having a fucking day returning kicks and punts. And Peyton Manning was running a Peyton Manning game where he was just cutting up in between the defensive line and the linebacker core. And that's when Ray Lewis was not looking exactly like 100% Ray Lewis. He was definitely a step behind. And to me, that was probably the biggest win for them in their entire season, even more so than the Super Bowl. That game right there proved that they were the best team in football. And then, of course, you beat Peyton Manning, you beat his brand new team, the Denver Broncos. And then, of course, the path through the AFC has to go through the New England Patriots. And, 2012 was no different. So like week 3, the Patriots got out, built a lead, and then had that ghost of Billy Cundiff in 2011 in the back of their head where, oh fuck, we can't let this be a close game. Joe Flacco went off. He carried the team. He was better than the defense for the first time in his career and really put it away for the Ravens. And it was during that game that I purchased on eBay my signed 2012 helmet with nearly every single major player on it. The only ones that it's missing are Ray Rice and Terrell Suggs. One's more difficult to get than the other because I go to Safeway on a fairly regular basis, so I think I could probably get Ray Rice down there if I just bring it in a paper bag for him. But dude, I was totally convinced at this point that it didn't matter if the Atlanta Falcons or the 49ers were going to come through and have to face the Ravens in the Super Bowl. I thought it would be a cooler story if it was going to be between brothers Jim and John Harbaugh, but this was the time of year where everybody was thinking that Colin Kaepernick was going to be the second coming of Michael Vick, maybe a more refined version of it, and John Harbaugh was the guy who was letting him run the read option and absolutely destroying the great defenses that were in the NFC. And that sure as shit ended up being the case because Super Bowl 47 was also the Har Bowl. The Ravens came out flying. They looked like total world beaters in the first half. And then, if you remember, in the third quarter to kick off the game, Baltimore received the field goal. They didn't need a field goal in the first half. They received the kick from winning the coin toss at the beginning of the game. deferred, and Jacoby Jones returned the kickoff 108 yards, exercising the demon from a couple weeks ago back in Denver when Trenton Holiday was just cutting up the special teams. And then after, Baltimore was up 28-6. We all remember when half the Superdome, all the lights went out. The clock stopped and the lights went out. What the fuck happened there? It lasted for 34 minutes. I was losing my mind. Nobody knows what the hell happened, but it sure invigorated the 49ers because they came out and they fucking nearly tied it up. Going into the fourth quarter, it was 28-23 after the Ravens had built a 28-6 lead heading, just after the Jacoby Jones kick return. And in the fourth quarter, shit went fucking wild because the Ravens went down. They kicked a field goal in order to make it 31-23, and then Kaepernick busted off a 15-yard run in order to score a touchdown, and it was 31-29, and they went for the 2-point conversion, which would have tied it up, which would have been, I wouldn't have any hair today if that would have been the case, but they were unsuccessful, thank God. But realistically, you can talk about the safety by Sam Cook or the free kick, but it just came down to one final goal line stand. Ray Lewis making the play and stopping a swing pass from Kaepernick to Gore that sealed the deal, and the Ravens were once again Super Bowl champions. It was so poetic to see all of those guys, all of those great players that missed out on the 2001 victory, who got to come in and leave their footprint as being a part of one of the most complete football teams, at least in my opinion, in Super Bowl winning history. Without a doubt, probably one of the greatest quarterback performances throughout the entire playoffs was had by Joe Flacco. Ray Rice was immaculate. Anquan Boldin was right there along with Dennis Pitta in order to provide a safety blanket for him, and the defense was playing lights out. Ed Reed was all over the field, and Ray Lewis was playing like it was his last few days on earth because he knew he had nothing left that he needed to keep in the tank, and it showed because that team was always on the same page throughout the entire time, and it's proof that leadership in professional sports is a legitimate thing. And hopefully in a few years' time, or maybe next year's time, we'll be able to talk about a championship winning Lamar Jackson Ravens team. So hard to keep saying Ravens and Raiders when they're your two favorite teams. Hopefully that's the case. They sure look like they're on a great track, and maybe they'll be as complete as the 2012 team is, in my opinion. Hope you guys enjoyed that, because this is my favorite team ever, and I could talk about them for decades and decades. And like I said before, if there's the team you would like for me to cover that you don't think gets enough press, it doesn't matter if it's football, baseball, basketball, hockey, I'd love to talk about any of them. Feel free to drop them down there, and that's a good place to end this retrospective here today. I appreciate you guys taking the time to watch this. I've been Khan Swaylo. I want you guys to follow your gut and get after it. Take care, everyone.